Friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again with another surprise little episode with my friend, colleague, Mr. Stephen Dickson. Steve, very popular return last week, my friend.
Was it? That's good to hear. Keep coming back. I thought it was like the bad penny or terrible twosome, but obviously not. Thanks, Chris.
No. Oh, seriously, I've got lots of feedback, lots of interest. I had one very interesting one, and now looking at you, looks like you've had a bit of cosmetic surgery. They said you're getting younger and I'm getting older.
Well, they're terribly polite. Not sure how that's happening, but I mean, I was hoping for the sort of the Benjamin Button-esque genes to sort of display themselves at some stage, and I'm still waiting.
No, fair play to you, mate. Dorian Gray, I think. You know,
A haircut can do a world of good, Chris.
Keep that portrait well hidden, mate. But listen, lovely to have you back on. I know how busy you are, and we're literally continents apart yet again. And I had a plan of what I was going to ask you, and then all of a sudden it's gone out the window. And as I say window, I'm looking at the two pictures behind you. One with the poppy and the Union Jack, and a lady that I know very well there. So well done to you. That's a positive. But then the gentleman to her left. What a nice thing to see that, mate.
That's King Charles. Yeah, I used to have I had the previous monarch, his mother, Queen Elizabeth, on my desk for years. It was always something I sort of when I got my own office and sort of started work for myself, where putting a picture of the British monarch on my desk or above my desk wouldn't look so out of place. No, I think that whether whatever your view of the monarchy, I think King Charles is a very good man. He's a very good ambassador for most good causes that exist in the world, and therefore I did. It wasn't reluctant, but it was a hesitation of taking the portrait of Queen Elizabeth off, and of course replacing it with her with King Charles, as you will obviously understand. But no, the monarch should be there and should be seen to be. You've got to be seen to be believed, as his mother always said. And there he is, being very visible in most of my calls when I'm on video conference.
Yeah, no, good on you, mate. It's the changing of the guard and slight modifications and changes, but good principles being kept and maintained. And that's something that I wanted to cover today, Steve, because there's been a lot of press coverage now about the various generations, and obviously with our industry, the challenges now are probably even greater than people even imagine, because so many of the key and really important responsibilities and job functions that we've got in the aviation industry, it's now becoming very evident. The majority of younger generations now, they just don't want to do those jobs anymore.
Yeah, I saw an article yesterday, which I think has been published in many places. It was a result of a study that was particularly in the UK, I think, run by the University of Kent or Suffolk or someone. I think Kent, University of Kent.
Yeah.
Which was talking about the challenges around the younger generation, particularly when it comes to mental health. And obviously, the way in which they suffer is very different than before. But is it about sufferance, or is it about the ability to speak about these things? And of course, the two are very different ways to look at this. Some would say, sort of the right-wing critics talk about the snowflake generation. Those on the left sort of say, oh, well, give us a chance. Life is much tougher than it used to be. For your generation, we can't get a house, we can't get a job, we can't get an apprenticeship, we can't get on the ladder. You started a job and that set you up for life. I think there's something to be said about that. Although, as you well know, Chris, I'm not on the left of the political spectrum. I'm much more centre right. So I'm all about giving people opportunity and government creating opportunities for people to make success themselves. But if you look, I mean, it's something we touched on last week, without sort of needing to be political or use studies to tell us what's going on. We've seen directly, Chris, after COVID, the impact of the stress or the intensity of the types of job that exist in our industry that you and I speak about, whether it be in airport operations or in airline operations or in ground handling or in cargo terminals or in logistics or last mile solutions or whatever it might well be. Those are pretty intense jobs. They're pretty safety critical. You've got to be on top of your game. You've got to be alert. You've got to be non-fatigued. I remember during the restart 2022, when really things started to ramp up, we were the churn, 60%, 70% in some organizations,
Yeah.
um, whereby they just, got people through the door, they worked a week on shift or the first day on shift, not unheard of him. Oh, bollocks to this. I'm out of here. I can get a far better job in, somewhere else in the service sector, within hospitality or leisure and retail or something along those lines than working here where I've got to stand out in the rain, get shouted abuse at by passengers or have to work double time because none of my colleagues are coming to work. So I do think there's something to be said for the environmental factors that play havoc with the younger generation that maybe we were not so predisposed to. And sorry, Chris, I'm a few years younger than your good self. I know you won't find that offensive. That's just a fact. But I but I do no. But the point I'm making is I think whether it was me coming through the system
Yeah.
25 years ago or you
Yeah.
a few more years than that, I think a lot of those a lot of our traits and a lot of our behaviors were the same. We just got on with it. You started work at 16 years old and you got into the gig and you absolutely loved it and you thrived in it. Why was that? Somebody probably gave you an introduction. Somebody made a phone call for you. Somebody gave you a leg up. You were properly trained. You were inducted into the business. You were made to feel part of that company. Whether it was me joining Service Air or you joining, I can't remember. It was a
Well, it started off with a freight forwarder, but the big
oh, that's
issue
yeah.
was Lufthansa. Lufthansa.
But going into Lufty, Chris, and the opportunity. I
Yeah.
mean, Lufthansa, what a great school.
Yeah.
Those years ago. Question a bit for others to answer whether it is now or not, in the same way that the British Airways School 30, 40 years ago was an amazing setup. Again, I'll let others be the judge of how good an organization that is today to do what it's done for the likes of you and I and many of our listeners, I'm sure. So yes, you might look at those headlines, the work shy, woke generation, or you might actually say, as I did when I read it, actually, how do we do something about this? How do we create better opportunities for people in this business? So maybe,
Exactly, Steve.
Chris, actually, that gentleman behind whom I will just bring to the fore, that gentleman here, when he was the Prince of Wales,
Yeah.
created the Prince of Wales. What was it called? His charitable foundation.
Duke of
Um,
Edinburgh.
no, no, that was his father. But the Prince of Wales, well, basically he took all the homeless and they created all the
Oh yeah,
apprenticeships and
yeah, 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 yeah.
yes, yes,
We
yeah,
gave him a
yeah,
chance. Yeah, yeah.
give him a chance. And he took them and he funded that himself, and he gave them opportunities. And I saw that, and a lot of actually those people had been successful through that. Some of them got invited to the coronation. I mean, how wonderful is that?
No, that is
So the
brilliant.
story of a guy who used to sleep rough, and Prince Charles had gone and helped him and gave him the leg up that he needed. Most people don't have the chance to get a leg up from somebody of that
Yep,
influence.
yep.
So what can we do in our industry, Chris, to maybe give that influence or create that influence or support people?
I totally agree, Steve. And I think what you touched on there about being made felt like a part of something and special. I remember the first few days at Lufthansa, and you were allocated somebody who was a senior member of the staff, and they took it upon themselves to make sure that you didn't fail, because if you did, it meant that they didn't do a good enough job. But you weren't allowed to be let alone on a particular job until somebody said, "Yep, they're okay." And once you got the seal of the confidence from them, you felt better. And then with Lufthansa, we all had to go to a wonderful place, very dear and close to my heart, called Zeeheim in Frankfurt, which was the training centre where all the staff came from all over the world. And not only
Yeah,
was it good for learning, but it was also good for mixing and finding out, what other people were doing and having contacts. I abused it a little bit because I used to think, right, where do I want to go on holiday next? Now I've got somebody I can go and visit or put me up. But it was an incredible place, and I just think now the aviation industry's got to take note of all of this, because we can't keep doing what we're doing and expecting something different. And irrespective how the new generations are feeling and why and whether or not it's their parents' fault, society fault, politics, too open, too let's talk about problems, etc. Whatever the reason, we've got to do something different. And if we don't, goodness me, AI and everything else isn't going to come quick enough, to fill the gap.
yeah. I just remembered. It's the Prince's Trust, Chris, of course, that you would remember now as well.
There you
The
go.
Prince,
Yeah, yeah,
Prince's
yeah. And,
Trust.
yeah, and good
Um,
on him. He was ahead of his time.
absolutely ahead of its time, particularly when it came to that, and also environmental factors. And I remember, growing up and people saying, "Oh, Prince Charles talks to plants, or Prince Charles talks to trees. He must be something wrong with that fella." I find myself talking to plants and living creatures now as well, or talking to a tree, or not generally expecting a response. But sometimes it's better to swear at the tree than somebody in your vicinity.
Yeah. And that's what I'm
But
doing.
no, but the point, but the serious point I'm making, sort of rather than tongue in cheek, this was about actually understanding the impact of climate change much earlier than anybody ever did. His father was the founder of the World Wildlife Federation, WWF, and the
Yeah.
president for many years of the WWF and wildlife. So a lot to be said for that. What I just to bring it back to something relevant for the audience rather than sort of me sort of waxing lyrical about the royal family, which of course we could create a new series of podcasts on. Salam is here today because our listeners may have noticed last week that we were without video.
Yeah.
That's because I was put in charge of the record, and well, let's be safe, we didn't have the video. So Salam is here today, but Salam, shout out. Next series is the royal podcast. But Chris, bring it back to a point. I think that a couple of listeners, I had a couple of messages as well, which I rarely do doing these sessions. But one of the messages that I did have was exactly around touching on the resource issues
Yeah.
and the belief, wrongly held belief, falsely held belief that our resource issues are no more, that we've moved on, that everything is good and we're all good again, and yeah, sure, we're right, and it's all great. That is a complete and utter fallacy. We still have rising, I mean, some inflationary pressures, different parts of the world moving at different
Yeah.
directions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Therefore, we've still got this upwards pressure on wages and labor costs, and getting people through the door. And there is more employment opportunities available to people. I mean, some markets have full employment, but within the sector in which we operate at the, dare I say, towards the bottom end of the minimum wage labor, which it sort of pains me to sort of say sort of that, but you always think about people should be paid more, it should be respected more, and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
does that but at that end, that sort of, with that sort of spectrum that we're dealing with, whether it's in Middle East or it's here in Asia Pacific or it's in Europe, those pressures still exist and they're not going to go away. And I think there has to be recognition that this is not just about money anymore. There's something else has to give. So what else changes?
It is. No, I agree with you, Steve. I've always believed as well. And you touched on some regions there that we've both worked in and worked in for a long periods of time. But if you make people feel a little bit special or a little bit part of something, it does make their day better. It makes them feel better. And I know everybody will be saying, right, it's personal asset value and earning an extra buck or whatever, which yes, of course. But people also have to be realistic. And the way the business and the industry has gone for many years, that realism is sort of fading into the distant mist. And you look at some of the things that are going on now, Steve. If we don't change and change quickly and stop trying to please everybody all of the time, it's going to be a real uphill battle for certain things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And another thing now, Ryanair, our dear friends, and what he said there about, people have got to be prepared for this summer increase in fares because Boeing just aren't delivering aircraft quick enough. Our industry also is very reactive, and people haven't got enough wherefore to sort of get the timing right. And you always see it, you get a boom and everybody wants to go out and buy freighters and convert. And then all of a sudden the tail of the alligator swings round and you think, oh, blimey, I didn't see this coming. And then it all stops again. And then you wait for the next one. And whatever the political or environmental issues or pressures that come on the business, that also rebounds and hits off the wall and comes back and hits you in the face. I mean, why are we not better at forecasting, Steve? And balanced investment, balanced production, balanced agreements. Why doesn't somebody say, look, this makes sense, we've got to all do it, instead of saying, this makes sense, we should all do it, but let's hope that we all agree we can do it.
Um, Look, really good question, Chris. I think there is So if you look at what a lot of the industry are talking about, they all talk about data, they talk about machine learning, they talk about
Yep.
uh, predictive outcomes, they talk about artificial intelligence, business intelligence, blah 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 blah. It all sounds great, but what are you actually doing that's different today that than you did yesterday with all of these fancy words and phrases that you keep coming up with? So I'm yet to see, and there are pockets of this, I would say, but I'm yet to see on a meaningful scale, Chris, maybe two or three things. Seeing how my points one and two go, I might give you a third. Point number one, data.
Yep.
What is data? We talk about data a lot. Data this, data that. We need the data. We don't get the data. They don't share the data. We've got the data, but we can't analyze it. We don't have the data, so we can't analyze it. We could analyze it, but I don't have the resources or the skills or whatever, whatever, whatever. Our industry is not all that great at sharing data, but we've got oodles and oodles and oodles of it. Mountains of data. Even
Yep.
if that even resides in lakes. They've managed to somehow hide this data in a water-filled lake, which is remarkable. Well, that's what I thought a data lake was. I later found out that it wasn't. We talk about cloud services and the big boys, the Amazons or the Microsoft with their AWS and their Azure products, or even Google, dare I say. Not really sure that that's a
Yep.
meaningful player in the cloud space, but although I did two Google meetings this week. Google Meet. I don't know. Some companies use Google Meet. It's rather peculiar, um, uh, and awkward. We're on Zoom, so which is great, and works properly. But and when you talk about data and this data lake, how do we access that? Who accesses it? What do you do with it? So if you're going to have all this data and just report on it, but then not take any actionable outcome,
Yes.
it becomes meaningless. Now,
Yep.
data was meaningless after 2019 when it came to revenue management. We always use data,
We
historical
had
data,
19. Yeah.
predictive
Pre-COVID.
outcome.
Yeah.
Okay, but operational data generally probably should be pretty sound. So all of that data we've got, everybody says in aviation there's no 2 days that are the same. Well, actually, there's chunks of those days that are almost identical, whether it be 20% of the day or 6% of the day or individual events and one-offs in a particular period. So I would say let's use that data to deliver predictive outcomes better and actually change the way we do things. So use your AI and your ML to predict better outcomes, not just in terms of optimization of resources, but across the ecosystem. How do we get better at that? So sure, somebody will say, and I'd love to hear from a listener to say, we're doing this really well and we all share data and the ecosystem participates and collaborates well with the data we've got in the AODB or the ops control systems or in our data lakes. So happy to be challenged on that. The second point, Chris, then is if we do have all this data, who is the owner of that data? Who's the custodian? How do we then create one single version of the truth or one single source of the truth? Who is
Yeah.
that single source? Where does it exist? Does it move at any given point in time in the journey, whether it be a turnaround or a logistics delivery or a end last mile production, etc.? So how do we use it and who's the owner? Airlines are bad sharers, don't want to give much to airports. They say, oh, that's all confidential. No, it's not. I can find it on Cirium, I can find it on SRS, I can find it on OEG, etc., etc., etc. So there's lots of that available. It's just the airlines don't trust airports. That's fundamentally the problem. And then we get down to the crux of it. And the third point then is who are the consumers of all of this? Well,
Yep.
when I know where an aircraft is or what time my flight's going to depart based on making a projection on an inbound, sure enough, the airport can do that, the ground handler can do that and tell me themselves. Surely you can use and provide that information to your security staff who are manning the lanes. Surely you can provide that to the freight forwarders or to the agents to let them know what time their shipments will be. Or if there's a delay on the ramp, offloading because of X, Y, Z, so we won't meet the 60-minute offload target, etc. Do we do any of that, Chris?
Supposedly, Steve,
Okay.
supposedly. And that's the
So
problem. It's this supposedly doing it that confuses people and then aggravates people. And
yeah,
that's something that's got to change as well, because even with something that is so fundamentally important, safety.
for
And you
sure.
know as well as I do, some of the work we've done, you try and get accurate safety detail, SPIs from more than one party in the same sector. They won't give it. They don't want to share it because they think that their customers will see them in a worse light. that is a sad reflection of where we are.
So let me can't challenge back to that then. So, IATA,
Yep.
I've got lots of people in their organization to, I thought, help the industry collate, aggregate, standardize using lots of data. So I frankly don't care who the carrier is or who the airport is or what the ground handler name is. What I care about is understanding, am I on track and am I performing against best practice? Now, IATA do have pockets of that goes out to some of the IOSA carriers. Maybe not to the granularity some of the carriers would want, but that does exist. But in other examples, Chris, does it exist at the airport level or the ground handler level? I'm not so sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. And without being too damning or whatever, I think okay, IATA is there for a reason and a purpose, and the origins were fundamentally correct and still are. However, it's a case of do what they can for everybody at the same time, and you just can't do that. That's where I think the difficulties come. It's trying to please everybody all of the time. You just can't. And people
Yep.
are now for this paradigm shift that's necessary now. People have got to do what's right for the majority and do what's right from the common sense perspective, and got to keep one eye now on customer service, especially on the passenger side, because some of the things you spoke about there and the way the queues are now, I've experienced it a lot in the last 3-4 months, and internationally now, some of the God, dear Lord above, some of the services that are being offered are absolutely terrible, Steve.
Yeah. I still see this. I mean, there's lots of good happening, Chris. We mustn't ever forget
Always,
that.
always, always. But people will always
Challenge.
remember the longest
Ah,
queue or no
of course.
information. They won't say this is great, this is great. But obviously, there's a lot of good being done, and that's great. But that's just like all of us, everybody's walking, talking, speaking, running. There's a lot of good, but you've got to be careful when the little niggles come in because they turn into things that are bigger and worse.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, just one point I wanted to make, Chris. We should reference it, talking about some of the challenges in the industry. We're still not through this sort of cash crunch or the capital
No,
crunch,
no.
and particularly, we're going into northern summer now in the northern hemisphere. Coming out of winter, ski season being good for some, not so good for others, probably a bit ropey for some of the European operators. But I was sad to see the demise of Lynx in Canada uh,
Yeah,
last week.
yeah,
So they announced on, I think, Thursday or Friday that they were stopping flying by Sunday. I think that was actually, whilst it's obviously been challenging for them, and the deal that they hoped would come off with Flair, reportedly did not come off. They gave their customers at least flying over the next 72 hours some notice, and that they would be stopping on Sunday. I have seen carriers in the past for, obviously no malice, but they just sort of gone, finished. That's it. Sorry. Now, of course, the board and the management know that is a likely outcome.
yeah,
Isn't it to hand it in a way that Lynx has tried to do respectfully to the
yes,
customer base and say, look, after the weekend, we're done. Sorry, folks. Really tragic. And of course, for all of the employees who, sort of knew this was coming. So I think that's it. It just goes to say one of the things that we said before, Chris, during COVID, which brings me back, was one lives by the sword and one dies by the sword.
yeah, 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 yeah.
They tried,
Especially in this industry.
they tried to do their very best to the last, which I thought was quite respectful.
Yeah. And on that note, my friend, we better hang up because we don't
I've had
want
my
to.
last. I've had my last for the day.
Yeah, we don't want to over challenge people.
Well,
But
that's it.
seriously, and again, as always, fantastic industry, brilliant people in it, great people trying to make change. I just feel that some of these little niggles now we've got to address, and we've got to do for the right reasons and be bold enough to say, look, we've got to do things now differently.
Good.
Stephen,
Absolutely. Doing
another
that.
week. Yep. Who knows where you'll be next time we're on board or
Next
online?
time, who knows? I'm traveling again from tomorrow morning, and then on the road for quite a while. I think as you saw my diary, I shared it with you last week. So anyway, onwards and upwards. Stay safe. Keep flying high. See you
Yep.
later.
And to everybody that sent a comment, it's really appreciated because both of us feel as if there's somebody out there when we do get a message. So please keep them coming. Thank
Oh,
you very
at
much.
least, at least two.
Yeah, Salem, good to have you back, son.
Thanks a lot. Cheers, Chris.
Cheers. All the best. Bye.